Hi, we're with the International Dyslexia Association, and we are going to be joined by Resha here with the nonprofit Dyslexia Alliance for Black Children. She is also a mother and has worked in the education system for quite some time, so we're excited to share her story with you all.
Hi,
Hi,
can you
how
hear me
are
okay?
you? I can. Can you
I'm
hear
good. How are you
me?
doing?
I'm
Yeah, I
well. How
got
are
you.
you? Good.
Good. Thank you so much for taking the time today to talk to us, Risha.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So your journey in education, how did that start for you?
So my early career was working with charter schools, and working with nonprofits who were, leading different efforts with education reform. And so, when I sort of reflected on what I wanted to do, I was actually transitioning from a very early career in retail,
Uh-huh.
buying, and just didn't want to do that. Just I didn't. I like clothing, I like fashion and all of that, but it didn't matter to me. It wasn't speaking to my heart, and it wasn't speaking to my earlier experiences. And my earlier experiences as a Black child growing up in the Bronx, and realizing very early on that something was not quite right with my school experiences, and seeing schools fail children, failing my family members, failing my peers, and realizing that I wanted to be a part of changing that. So that's what led me to charter schools. And at that time, I didn't really know exactly how I fit into changing that, but I knew that it was the space that I belonged in. So,
So I I think that's so empowering, right? Like you're seeing this problem within your own community and growing up in this environment where essentially we have this school system that is failing so many people, and a school to prison pipeline, a school to poverty pipeline, and you felt a calling to like change that structure, like to where does that come from?
it comes from my parents, right? So my parents are from the U.S. Virgin Islands. They're from St. Croix, a small island, but it's a mighty little island, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful, but it's not a rich island, even though it is one of the U.S. territories. So my parents came to New York City and specifically to the Bronx in the 1970s. And one of the early messages that I got from my father was to get my education. And he said, if you get your education, no one can take that away from you. There'll be many things they can take from you, but they can't take that away from you. So that was one of my early messages. And then I entered school and I started to get some other messages about, how I belong there. Am I going to be one of the brightest kids in the class? How teachers were responding to me. So I got this second message from my dad, which was, although education is important, there are going to be a lot of people who don't want you to get it, who are going to put up a lot of roadblocks for you. And my kindergarten to eighth grade experience, there were a lot of roadblocks. It changed a lot in high school for me because of the high school that I went to. But for a lot of the people that I grew up with, it didn't change. And I saw the devastating impact of that. And you reach a point where you're like, I have to be part of the solution. This can't continue to happen. And so that's how I entered into, the field of education reform. And once I got there, my eyes were open. I was like, okay, well, what's really happening here? Where's the break happening? And I started to see that language. And so when I talk about language, I'm talking about oral language, I'm talking about written language. So our reading and our writing, when there were breaks in that system, it seemed to have compounding negative impacts on academic outcomes. And so I decided at that point, you know what, I'm going to study this further. So I started a master's program in speech language pathology. And I was recently married, newly married. And I was also starting a family at that time. So I had some difficulties with my pregnancy and was on bed rest for 5 months with my son. And so I stopped the program, and I wasn't sure if I was ever going to return to it. I sort of just started to focus on my growing family. So I didn't finish the program, but I was still working with charter schools. And so I have two children. I am the mother of a child with dyslexia, and he is 11 years old now. And when he was about 2 years old, I started to see that he was having some language delays. So we got him evaluated and we got him services, and his speech language pathologist at the time, when he was being discharged, actually turned to me, and she's a great speech language pathologist, really really an advocate for children. She said, his language has resolved, like he's caught up, but this might show up again for him once he gets to kindergarten. And if it does show up, don't delay. Like, do something about it and do it right away. And I think at that point was where this journey got very difficult once he entered elementary school. And I had to deal with advocating for him within a school system that, really is not equipped and doesn't want to identify, children in kindergarten or first grade or second grade. They want to wait to have them fail before they identify him. And it, set up this relationship between the school and the family that was really combative, right? Because we had different goals at that point. My goal was to get my son intervention because he wasn't learning to read. And their goal was, well, no, we're going to wait. We'll give him RTI. We're going to give him a double dose of what's not working in the classroom and wait for him to fail. So that battle with the school that ultimately led me to removing him from our local public school and putting him in a private school that's committed to serving children who have language-based learning differences was really eye-opening for me as a parent, because I've been an administrator, I've been in the school on the other side, but being a parent and seeing it, you really feel the breaks that are happening in the system, and you feel the way it's impacting your child and your child's self-esteem.
Yeah, because I was going to say, like, as an educator, you kind of know, I mean, you're seeing these challenges that a young person's facing, happens to be your son. So, like, even more so connected to the situation. And it's almost like you already know what the answers are, and then you have to fight a system that won't give you the support that you already know is needed. How did you feel going through that? And then what advice for parents would you have that are dealing with that same challenge?
So, and I think this is important because even going into it with a background in education reform and having, not necessarily a lot of money, but I had resources. I had people I could reach out to and say, hey, what do you think about this? This is what the school has said. Look at this report and tell me what you think. Even with all of that, and I was in a high performing school district. I moved to the school district because it's high performing. Even with all of that, it wasn't enough to get my son what he needed. And it just shows you how much things are stacked against you. So, he was denied services the first time around. I had to go and do independent evaluations and then come back in and advocate for more services. But by that point, the teachers were in the school, they were not happy with me. They couldn't imagine that I would dare to say, well, no, you're wrong. He needs services. And it's, it really makes it you sort of against them, and it shouldn't be like that. And so for parents, I think, one of the important things is to really go with your gut. A lot of times we sort of see that something might be off, right? That the child needs a different sort of of environment or a different sort of intervention, or just proper reading instruction, right? Because it really comes down to that. So go with your gut. And when you're having conversations with schools, one of the things that, and it probably got me into trouble, but if they came to me and they said, well, we want to use this on him, I'm like, well, where's the evidence? Why does that work? Why did you choose that program? It doesn't make you popular, when you start asking those questions. And that's unfortunate. And it's unfortunate, but it's true. And then, the other part of it is, and so, I'm also the founder of a new nonprofit,
Yeah.
the Dyslexia Alliance for Black Children. And I want to speak to the other part of it. So I had, experiences that were very common to any parent who's going through this sort of journey, regardless of your race or your socioeconomic status. You get to the school systems and you're advocating for your child, and it's dyslexia and or another, language-based reading disorder, and they're not prepared to help your child, or they don't, or for whatever reason, for a number of reasons that they don't. And so they tell you to wait, or they say, oh, well, he's only in kindergarten. It's too young. We can't evaluate him yet. We're not going to see it yet. And all that's simply not true. You may not have the test in your school building to do it, but it can be done. So, there's this, we'll go into RTI, and so we'll give it more time and more time and more time. We won't intervene until your child is failing. But I also saw the other side of it, and it really speaks to teacher expectations and teacher expectations for Black children. And so my son was the only Black child in his class. And, his reading was on the very low end of average. And I heard things like, well, it's okay that he's on the low end of average. And, the school psychologist turned to me, and, he scored well on his IQ testing. And he turns to me, he says, wow, are you surprised your son is so smart? And these are messages that they felt brave enough to tell me in person. So imagine the messages that he's getting in the classroom, and imagine how this is impacting his self-esteem. And so teacher expectations show up a lot for Black children. And it's historical, and it continues to be a part of our system. And so I founded the organization to really address this this double disparity that we face, right? The impact of dyslexia, and then the impact of race. And when they overlap, it's it's devastating. And we see that in not just in the personal stories, but we see that in the data. We see that in the numbers, when we see the number of children, of Black children, that are not reading at grade level. And we start to, look at outcomes, life outcomes, poverty and the school to prison pipeline. And we wonder, how's it being fed? I can tell you how it's being fed. I stood there and said, wow, if I made this decision, I see how this would go very wrong for my child. And it's time, it's time for us to sort of break this pattern, right? It doesn't have to be repeated. My story is not uncommon. And that's why I started the organization, because we really need to have sort of a collective voice, and to have these greater conversations so that we can come up with a plan that is going to have lasting change for everyone.
I think that's so awesome. I mean, I totally see the compounded effect that you're talking about through the data on your website, and we'll drop a link so people can go and see the stats out there, because it's dyslexic, it's Black, it's people of color that are being severely impacted, when not only do you have a minority label in this country, but then you add a label of dyslexia, and it's just the work that you're doing is so important, and we need to keep pushing those messages, because it's a problem that has a solution to it if we get in there and do the work. So thank you for all the work that you are doing, because it's so meaningful to this community and to so many people out there. I do need to ask though, I see these individualized things that have throughout your story, but then you have this expanded mind to see it for other people and wanting to serve others? Is that through your family? Is that through it's not just, you're not just like, oh, I'm going to solve this for myself, but I'm going to solve this and work for my community. Like that's a that's a one percenter, like where does that come from?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes from, well, I think it's a calling, right? So I think it comes from that. And I think we experience certain things that sort of, amplify in our ear what our calling is. So, growing up in the Bronx and seeing the, experiences that were really painful, really devastating for, for people who were my friends, for people who were my family, where I saw, the language that was used with them in school to make them feel like they didn't belong there. So if you don't belong in school, you're not succeeding there. Where are you going to go? When you're 13 and you're 14 and there are not a lot of other options for you. And that experience early on stayed with me. And I kept being called back to this space to make that change. I said I had started a program in speech language pathology, and then I had my son, but then I'm called back to it because my son, he has dyslexia. And it's like I'm not going to be allowed to leave this space because I need to be here, because I need to be a part of that change. Because the pain that we have experienced for generations, and it's intergenerational trauma that we've experienced, we have to do something now to turn the tide. And I think, and I know that we can. I think there's a lot of momentum around it right now for this to be the time to take action. And so this is just where I belong. There's not even, when you are where you belong, it all lines up. That's kind of, that's why I'm here.
So important. Reading on your website, the word urgency comes to mind, because it's out there on the website, but I just love how it's right now. We can get involved, but how can people help? How can people on our platform here, how can they support and get involved with what you're doing?
Right. So thank you for visiting the website. We're actually going to be relaunching it in a couple of weeks, and there'll be a lot more information on there about, the sort of our next steps in terms of what we're going to do, because we have, sort of a three-prong approach to things. It's raising awareness, and it's, the traditional ways that we think about raising awareness when it comes to legislators and other decision makers. But it's also specifically raising awareness within the Black community, because there have been so many breaks in our relationship with our public institutions that we need to understand those. We need to repair them so that we can start receiving the benefits that we should be getting from our public institutions. And we need to also, start to have a conversation about Black literacy and, the history of it. Yes, because to just say that we're starting here at this point ignores why we are here, right? We have a history of a legacy with literacy in the Black community that began during slavery with anti-literacy laws and continue into Jim Crow and continued into, our policies around segregation. And although we're technically desegregated now, we're not really desegregated, right? And so, building awareness around that, but then also repairing our relationship with literacy, right? So we have this pipeline. We talk about, in adults with dyslexia, and a lot of times we'll talk about, oh, well, they become CEOs and they are these geniuses. And I believe that exists in every child. But when we have these systems that are set up that feed this pipeline, we destroy a child's self-esteem so much that they are not able to realize those gifts. And so we probably have some of the most brilliant people in the world sitting in prison because we've set them up to fail. And so there needs to be a conversation in our community about that so that we can reclaim our genius, right? So that's a part of it. And then it's educating and, right, it's educating and empowering. So, really collaborating with other organizations who are doing this work to continue to bring workshops to families, to teachers, because there are a lot of teachers that are on the ground that want to start this work, but they're maybe in larger districts or may not be sure how to do it. So we want to start doing that, educating and empowering. And then the last part of it is really sort of connecting people who are in the field. So we have our educators, we have our school psychologists, we have our speech language pathologists, we have our advocates who all need to come together to have this conversation and to plan, because we don't want to continue to have, and there are great programs out there, right? But how can we elevate those programs? How can we replicate them so that if I'm sitting in rural Mississippi and I'm like, well, you know what, I need this, what do I do next? Well, I hope that our organization can give you a plan on how to get this started and how to implement it in your community. So really, having a place where we have, like I said, this sort of collective voice, where we can, start to make change, and we can make it across the country, not just in one community, but across the country. So that's that's kind of where we are. And like I said, we're going to unveil our new website pretty soon, and we have a lot of really wonderful people who are working on this and who are joining us in this effort. And I feel really good about the direction that it's going in, and that it will go in.
Well, we'll be excited to share the new website as it unfolds out here. And then, yeah, I think understanding the history is so important, and then also the collective sharing of resources, and then having a way to do that. So we definitely will get that shared out to our community out here as well. You're going to be speaking at Decoding Dyslexia's events, March to Literacy. Oh, what can you tell us about that, and maybe some items that people could look forward to for that?
Yeah, so I'm really excited to be part of this conference. I think it's right on time. This conference is, it couldn't be better timed. So I'm going to be speaking on a workshop, Parents, It's Not Your Fault, Parents Are Not to Blame. And so really speaking from the parent perspective, going into depth with my story a bit more, and how we are, parents are really sort of set up, even when you're advocating for your child, even when your expectations, the expectation that your child should learn to read, how you can so quickly be villainized, or silenced. And, digging into that a little bit more in terms of my experience and the experiences that I've heard from other people as well. And then we'll have a teacher who's going to also give the teacher perspective on that as well.
Oh, that's really cool. That'll be great. And again, we'll keep sharing that information along the event so people can tune in for that. And I want to leave you with the last word. What is your message to families, educators, parents out there? What is your message to them?
So I think my closing message, and I guess my closing thoughts, is really it's a message of hope, right? Because I think that we are in a place where we can start to really turn the tide, and it's also a call to action. I think that we are at a time in the history of our country where we have this sort of window that's been opened, and maybe it's more of like a mirror. We're holding up a mirror, and we're seeing our reflection, and we're seeing, yes, there have been a lot of wonderful things, but we're seeing a lot of things that have not been right. We're seeing inequity, and at this time there is a demand for a change. And for me, when I think about it, literacy is really a key component of any movement forward, right? And when we think about literacy as a movement forward, we can't have that conversation without talking about equity. That has to be weaved into the conversation, and that's because of the history of inequities in this country. And any change is going to demand that sort of conversation. So, in closing, I'm going to close with the March to Literacy, because I think that it's, continues this conversation. A lot of wonderful speakers who are going to come together to share their experiences and their different areas of expertise, and really, have this conversation about Black literacy. So I am still looking forward to the event on March 13th, and I hope that our viewers will participate, because I think that it's bringing together all of these different individuals to really figure out what's next, what's the course of action that we need to take.
Definitely. Just want to thank you so much for taking the time today and all your work and just how important it is, and really looking forward to that event on March 13th, and hearing from you as well as the other speakers. So just thanks again.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really, just really happy for this platform to be able to talk about this. So thank you, Jared.
Have a great day. Thank you.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.